All right, welcome. Today we're diving into the concentric portion of the triphasic model. Now, while the eccentric and isometric phases are absolutely critical for storing up all that potential energy, the concentric phase, well, that's the grand finale. It's the overcoming phase. It's the sexy part that gets all the attention, because it's where we actually see force get turned into incredible athletic performance.
And this quote just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures how everyone thinks. Concentric strength, that's the universal measuring stick. It's the final output, the number you put up on the whiteboard. It's how much you can lift, how high you can jump, how fast you can sprint. But here's where we, as coaches and practitioners, need to pump the brakes. Is maximal force, just how much, really the most important thing for an athlete? I'm going to argue no, it's not. For almost every sport out there, the game-changing metric is the rate at which you can produce that force. It's all about the quality and the speed of the contraction, not just hitting a peak number.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to build a really solid model for understanding concentric performance. First, we'll define what we're actually trying to measure. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the neuromuscular physiology, the why behind an explosive movement. We'll look at the difference between high and low rate of force development, apply it all in a practical case study, and then boil it all down into 5 key takeaways you can use immediately. Let's get to it.
Okay, first things first. Let's make sure we're all speaking the same language. To properly train this quality, we have to be super precise about the variable we're targeting. It's not just about moving a weight, it's about how you move that weight through time. Let's start with the basics, right out of the textbook. The concentric phase is simply when a muscle generates enough force to beat a load, which causes the muscle fibers to shorten. We call it the overcoming phase. Simple enough? But this is the whole ballgame for performance. The real measure isn't just peak force, it's the rate of force development, or RFD. Think of it as the slope on that force time graph. It's how fast an athlete can put force into the ground, and I'm telling you, it is the single most important variable for any kind of explosive dynamic movement. I mean, think about the legends. Would Nolan Ryan have been a Hall of Famer without that blistering fastball? Muhammad Ali without the speed of his punch? Walter Payton without that explosive cut? No way. An athlete who can load up energy is totally useless if they can't unload it and turn it into rapid concentric force. So what's really going on under the hood to create a high RFD? You know, it's not just about having big muscles. It is a highly sophisticated, and more importantly, a trainable neural skill. This skill is basically run by 2 different levels of coordination, and we have to address both of them in our training. Let's break them down. First up, we've got intramuscular coordination. This is everything happening inside a single muscle. It involves 3 key things. First, recruitment. You got to get as many motor units on board as possible, especially those big, powerful, fast-twitch ones. Second, rate coding. You need to make those motor neurons fire at lightning speed. And third, rate coupling, optimizing how quickly those actin and myosin heads can grab on, pull, and let go. It's so important to get that. These are driven by a very specific neural signal just for that concentric pop. Now, the second layer is intermuscular coordination, how different muscle groups play together. And a huge key to elite performance is something called disinhibition. Basically, you have to train the nervous system to shut off the antagonist muscle, the muscle on the other side. See, when one muscle contracts really fast, the opposing muscle instinctively tightens up to protect the joint. It's a reflex. But that reflex acts like a brake on performance. Elite training is all about teaching the nervous system to take its foot off that brake. And this just shows you how amazingly complex this whole thing is. A powerful concentric move is the grand finale of this entire sequence. It needs perfect timing from the GTO reflex, the stretch shortening cycle, all those intramuscular factors, and what we call reactive ability. It's an incredible symphony of neural events. Okay, let's take all that theory and make it visual. What does this neuromuscular coordination, or the lack of it, actually look like on a force plate? We can see it crystal clear when we compare the force time curve of a highly trained athlete versus a poorly trained one. The difference here is it's night and day. The well-trained athlete has this perfectly seamless transition from that isometric bottom position into the upward drive. Their forces add together. The concentric action builds right on top of the stretch reflex, and they use about 95% of that stored elastic energy. But the poorly trained athlete, they have a lag, a delay. And in that delay, all that stored energy just bleeds off as heat, and the stretch reflex is wasted.
They only transfer about 60% of their potential, creating this little mini sticking point and just killing their RFD.
And visually, this is what beautiful looks like on a force time curve. Look at that transition from the bottom of the squat into the concentric phase. It is smooth as silk. The force curve shoots up on a steep, constant, clean line. This is proof that the concentric contraction is happening immediately, building on the stored energy and maximizing RFD. And now, here's the smoking gun. This is the key diagnostic tool for poor neuromuscular efficiency. You see that visible dip in the force line right at the transition? That's what we're looking for. That dip is the moment of truth. It's where the force from the stretch reflex has peaked, but the concentric action is late to the party. That gap is where all your power disappears. This dip is the biomechanical signature of poor reactive ability, and it's our job as coaches to get rid of it.
Okay, let's put this into practice. Time for a case study. A common scenario I guarantee you've all seen. This is where the science hits the weight room floor. So we've got a college sprinter, and this kid is strong. Their 1-rep max numbers look fantastic. But on the track, they're just flat. They have no pop out of the blocks, and their times have completely stalled out. So you put them on a force plate to do a squat jump, and boom, there it is. That classic dip right as they try to explode upwards.
So here's the question for you. Based on that data, what is the most likely reason this athlete has hit a wall? They have the strength, but they can't use it quickly. What does that dip in the force curve tell you is the real limiting factor here? Think about everything we've talked about: energy transfer, reactive ability, and that intermuscular coordination. Okay, before we solve that puzzle, let's do a quick knowledge check to make sure a couple of these key ideas are really locked in.
First question. In your own words, what is reactive ability? And how does it directly impact how much juice an athlete can actually squeeze out of the stretch shortening cycle? And number 2, when you move really fast, why does the opposite muscle, the antagonist, contract? And for our purposes, for elite performance, why do we have to actively train our athletes to fight against this natural reflex? All right, let's check the answers. For our sprinter, the problem is poor intermuscular coordination and reactive ability. That dip is the sign of a slow concentric contraction, which is causing them to waste about 40% of their stored elastic energy. A huge leak. For our questions, reactive ability is simply how efficiently you can switch from stretching to contracting. The faster the switch, the more energy you get to use. And finally, that antagonist muscle contracts to protect the joint, thanks to the GTO reflex. We have to disinhibit it or detrain it to take the neural brakes off of RFD.
Okay, that brings us to the finish line. If you're going to remember only 5 things from everything we've talked about on the concentric phase, please make it these 5. 1. Stop obsessing over absolute strength. The true measure of athletic performance is rate of force development. 2. High RFD is a neural skill you have to train, not just a result of muscle size. 3. The transition is everything. That seamless switch from isometric to concentric is where the magic happens, or where it's lost. 4. Learn to see the dip on a force time curve. It is the clearest sign of an energy leak you will ever find. And finally, number 5. To be fast, you have to train your athletes to take the brakes off, to inhibit those overprotective reflexes in their antagonist muscles. Mastering these concepts, well, that's what separates the good from the great.